I'm Sam,
And this is Gabe.
and this is Coaster Wars.
Alright, welcome back to Coaster Wars. In this episode, we have a really cool battle for you guys. Definitely an interesting one. Speed versus intensity. I definitely think that's the best way to describe these two roller coasters.
I really think this is a good matchup because in reality, there is no good reason for these two coasters to be compared. I don't know how to explain it, but just looking at the two coasters we have matched up, I'm like, they're different types of coasters that are at different parks. They have one is speed and one is intense. There's really no normal reason that you would put these two together. I mean, the only reason we're putting them together is because that's how they line up on our top 15.
For sure. We do have a repeat fighter here today. So this is one of our roller coasters has been featured in a previous episode, which will be kind of cool to see if it can redeem itself a little bit, but it's gonna be tough. It's going up against a really good competitor, I think.
I have to agree, which is horrible because I still have to argue my coaster, but we'll see how it goes, I guess.
Yeah. I suppose without further ado, should we introduce the fighters?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In the red corner, standing at a height of 136 feet, reaching a top speed of 60 miles per hour. Hailing from the hills of Wisconsin and the Gravity Group Gym, it is Hades 360. In the blue corner, standing at a massive height of 310 feet, reaching a top speed of 93 miles per hour. Hailing from the shores of Lake Erie and the Intamin Gym, it is Millennium Force! Let the fight begin! Alright, so my number coaster here is going to be Millennium Force.
And my number 12 coaster is Hades 360.
So definitely once again, two different roller coasters. We had a Hades 360 in our first episode, actually. It was my number 15 coaster, which is why I say it's going to be hard for me to argue for it just because it's lower on my top 15 list.
And before we get started, I do want to make one correction. Back in the first episode, I said that Hades reached 70 miles per hour, and it actually only reaches 60. But besides that, I think we should dive in. So,
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a good one.
yes. Um, so to start, this is a Gravity Group roller coaster, Hades 360. It's at Mount Olympus in Wisconsin. It opened in 2004. And this is a wooden hybrid coaster now. And it does go 360 degrees, which is actually a very unique experience. And this is a super intense ride. Super intense. Even with that only 60 miles per hour. I feel like in today's coaster world, that doesn't seem like it's that fast, but think about when you're driving in a car at 60 miles per hour. That is really fast for what it sounds like.
Yeah, Hades 360 is definitely intense, and that's why we named this intensity versus speed. Playing off Millennium Force. Millennium Force has intensity as well, but the main showcase for that ride is definitely just the overall speed, the 93 miles per hour. But both these rides are very good. The one thing that I would like to mention right off the bat that I found out revisiting Hades 360 is when they did the redesign or whatever, they did not retract the whole coaster. So that is something that I did not realize. I thought they retract the entire coaster. They only redid the island out in the parking lot. So that's one of the reasons why this roller coaster is as rough as a lot of people like to complain about. They never actually did retract the entire ride.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention that, I feel like I've seen that in a video and you hear that it was retracked and you're like, oh, it's not as bad as it was. And then you ride it and you're like, no, it's actually worse. That makes a lot of sense. So, Yeah, we mentioned that in the first episode, and we'll probably be just reiterating a lot of that information. So if you already listened to that episode, go ahead, feel free to skip ahead to Millennium Force. But this is a very rough roller coaster. In fact, if it were to have a full retrack, it would probably be a lot higher in other people's lists, but it isn't. The one a little bit upside to this is when they did do the Hades 360, they replaced the PTC trains with the new Timberliner trains that had different restraints and more padding. So at least you're not getting jostled around in a PTC train, but it's still insanely rough. So
It is rough. This coaster definitely has a ton of potential, I think. The biggest thing that hurts this roller coaster is it doesn't have some of the sustained airtime that you'll find on other wooden roller coasters, where you can get up on an airtime hill and maybe for 2 or 3 sustained seconds of floater airtime. But this does have more, I'd call it a little bit more ejector airtime. It's kind of borderline between the two, but I'd call it ejector, but it's not sustained. It's more like quick pops. And some of that has to do with the way the roller coaster is designed and the fact that they only had, so much room in the tunnel to build a roller coaster.
yes.
But yeah, it's got some really good pops, but it doesn't have the ejector or the sustained airtime, I should say, that some of the other wooden roller coasters out there feature.
I will say this, that it is pretty inventive to get some more space out of this ride, that they utilized their parking lot and ended up putting an island out there. Because now that I think about it, I don't think I've seen that very much at other parks. And it was a really, to me at least, inventive way to create more space for this ride. And in addition to that, to go under the parking lot, they had to go into underground tunnels. And when this ride was built, it had um, the longest underground tunnel on a wooden roller coaster at 800 feet. And it goes through that tunnel basically twice, meaning a combined 1,600 feet of track is completely underground in the dark, and you can't see anything under there. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. It's definitely an intense moment. The thing I like about the tunnel is the visual aspect that you can't physically see anything. And then when you exit the tunnel, you have about a half a second of daylight, and then this roller coaster just decides to flip you right upside down. And that moment, you know, going through the tunnel and then exiting and hitting that inversion is the main reason why it made it onto my top 15 list to begin with. It's just an absolute crazy, intense, moment that just kind of throws you around a little bit. And then you're not even halfway through the roller coaster at this point, and you're just, thrown right back into that tunnel. And it's just a really cool experience. It's definitely, I'd call this a bucket list roller coaster just because of the tunnel. And how hard it is to reach this roller coaster. It's definitely on a lot of people's bucket list.
to talk about that inversion just a little bit, it is, so it's out in the island in the parking lot, but when you go into this inversion, it feels, so it's designed like a corkscrew, but it really has this like floater effect to it that almost makes it feel like a zero G roll rather than a regular corkscrew.
Yeah, I'd almost call this more of a cutback inversion than a full corkscrew. I think. The thing with corkscrews is it's just a one quick rapid movement, where a cutback is more of a, flip you upside down. You still get the laterals from changing direction, but then it kind of hangs you there for just a tad bit, and then you finish the inversion. So I'd almost call it more of a cutback than a corkscrew. But obviously, Gravity Group calls it a corkscrew, and so does Mount Olympus. But yeah, it's a little bit of a hybrid kind of inversion. It's not your typical corkscrew.
Yeah, it gives it actually a pretty unique feel to it and makes it a pretty unique element of the ride, which also just adds to the whole experience of this ride. Speaking of which, we're talking about all these elements and stuff. I'll give a really quick rundown of the layout of this ride, just so if anyone hasn't listened to that first episode, they kind of know what we're talking about. Um, we start with an amazing pre-lift section, which we also might talk about. You come out of the station and you go through a hill, a banked curve, a low curve, and a little S hill that brings you up into that lift hill. It's a 140-foot lift hill, 65-degree drop. And that leads you into the first 800-foot tunnel that includes a whole bunch of elements on its own that then brings you up into that first inversion, which leads into a 110-degree banked turn, a little camelback, and you're plunged back down into the 800-foot tunnel, which then leads you into the back section of this ride, which is just a whole bunch of turns, hills, this, that, and the other thing. And finally, you dip into the station. You heard that right. You still go down into the station. You're still up that high. And that's the end of the ride.
Yeah, the one thing I mentioned in the last episode is that this roller coaster is built on the side of a hill. So the way they constructed this ride is that the parking lot section or the tunnel section is actually the highest part of the roller coaster based off of elevation changes. And the thing that I also said in the last episode that maybe not everybody realizes, in Wisconsin, we have hills, believe it or not. We're not just a bunch of farm fields full of cows. Down in the southwestern part of the state where this amusement park is located, we actually have a few hills. And that's the way this roller coaster is built. So even after hitting that mid-course break section, after exiting the tunnel for the second time, you still have about 45 feet of elevation change to get back to the station. So this roller coaster carries its speed really well. It has a really good pacing, and that's why I would consider this an intense roller coaster, because you don't have a lot of time to breathe. It's not like it's not like a B&M Hyper or some of these bigger coasters where you have moments where you can kind of catch your breath and then you get thrown into it again. This roller coaster, it just hits you from start to finish. The thing about the tunnel that I feel like we didn't mention enough in the last episode is it's just a bunch of airtime pops, and then you have the 90-degree turn, and then it's just a couple more airtime pops. So there are, like she said, there's elements inside that tunnel. It's just not a bunch of straight track. So there's actually little airtime pops. There's some turn. There's a turn and stuff, and it kind of goes back and forth a little bit. It's not just straight track, which I don't think everybody realizes heading into riding this roller coaster.
Yes, especially because a lot of other rides that have tunnels, it is just straight track through them. So this ride really turns that on its head and makes you actually have elements inside the tunnels, which just adds a level of intensity when you can't see what's coming.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely an intense roller coaster. I think that's the best word to describe this ride, honestly, is it's intense. And that's because it's rough, it's fast, it's a lot of repetitive movements that just kind of really throw you around. And that's really what this roller coaster encompasses, is just intensity, roughness, and a little bit of speed too, I would say.
Yes. So I know what you're all saying. I am the theming queen. Where the heck does the theming come in this ride? And I know it doesn't have a crazy amazing queue. It's not an indoor coaster where they can build wherever they want. But where the theming comes in on this ride is the way they actually built the coaster. So Hades obviously is the god of the underworld. So what this ride was designed to do is they specifically wanted those tunnels, and it was meant to act like you were plunging into the underworld. And then the intensity of this ride was meant to mimic the crazy intensity of the underworld and your sort of battle against Hades. So unlike some other rides where your theming comes in with decorations and queue lines and cinematography and stuff like that, this ride brings the theming in with the actual design of the ride itself, which can also add theming to a ride. So
it's one of the roller coasters out there where the name actually makes sense.
yeah, I agree with that statement.
Mount Olympus. It's at Mount Olympus, which is, ancient Greece theming.
Yep.
And it goes underground, which is typically where hell or the underworld would exist. And, it's one of the few roller coasters where the name makes a lot of sense. So,
yes, yeah.
And that's where you would call this roller coaster themed a little bit. but yeah, it's definitely a good ride. I think it's an underrated ride in my opinion. I don't think everybody ranks it as high as it, or I think a lot of people rank it lower than it should be. But some of the problem is the location. I think that's something we definitely have to talk about for a second when you're looking at these two roller coasters. Is Hades 360 is at in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, at a park you've never heard of, and
And
Millennium Force is at a place they like to call the roller coaster capital of the world.
oh yeah.
um,
Well, and in
so
addition,
some of it,
oh sorry, in addition, exactly to that point, Mount Olympus, I mean, it has other coasters there, but they're not roller coaster enthusiast type coasters, and they're also not like big. They're not big grabs for people to go there. So they are good coasters, but Hades 360 kind of is their biggest baddest thing they got there. So there's not much else to pull people over there.
yeah, for sure. The biggest thing the reason why I mentioned it is exposure. Everybody has ridden Millennium Force. I mean, anybody who's a coaster enthusiast or considers them a coaster enthusiast has made the trek to Cedar Point and has ridden this ride. Where Hades 360 is a little more obscure. Not everybody knows about it, especially if you're a newer coaster enthusiast and you're not from the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
You might not know about this roller coaster in Hades 360. So I think that's why, maybe not as many people will credit Hades 360 as being a good ride because maybe they haven't experienced it or they've only gotten one or two rides on it because they were driving through and they didn't get the full experience that this ride offers.
I agree. So, but to switch gears here a
But
little
with
bit.
that,
Oh,
yeah, I think we're ready to talk about Millennium Force. This is a roller coaster we have yet to mention in our lists. It's one of my favorite. It's a personal favorite of mine. I love Millennium Force. I love the speed, and that's the mistake people make going in to ride this ride. Is they're expecting maybe something more like Fury 325 with airtime, or maybe they're expecting something with like Intimidator 305, which is just crazy intense G-force. And that's not really what this roller coaster is about. It is about that speed. It is about how fast can I throw this thing off the top of the lift hill and how long I can carry that speed through the ride. And if you go in with that expectation of I'm just all about the speed, you're going to love this ride.
100%. Um, I think what happens with this ride is because people are expecting such an intense ride and then they don't get that. It leads to a little bit of overhyping on the roller coaster part. And again, like Gabe said, if you don't have the right idea going into this coaster, it can seem like a little bit of a letdown. I was doing research and I saw that it had the nickname Millennium Force Less, but that's not what this coaster was
That's
built.
bullshit.
Yeah.
That is so wrong, though. It is not a forceless ride. And I
No.
hate that nickname. Does it have airtime? Okay, that's a question. But is it forceless? No, I gray out every time on that first pull out. That is not a forceless experience. I think it's stupid to call the ride that. I'm sorry, you triggered me a little bit, but um,
But
I hate that nickname for this ride because it's not forceless.
I totally agree with that assessment. It's again, I am the same way. I gray out in that first pull out, and you can't call a ride forceless if it causes you to gray out. And of all the coasters that me and you have ridden, I have over 100 credits at this point, and it's the only ride that has made me gray out. And so many other rides claim so much more intensity and so many more forces. Well, guess what? This is the only one that's made it so I couldn't see. So.
Yeah, the only other ride that's ever made me gray out is Iron Gwazi and that first pull out. I have grayed out on that ride. But yeah, it's not forceless. See, and that's what people don't understand. Just because it doesn't have airtime does not mean it's a forceless ride, okay? A ride does not need to have airtime to be a forceful ride. I just want to put that out there. Like I said, you triggered me with that name. So I'm a little heated right now, but it's one of those things, like I said, where a lot of people misconstrued it. Here's the other thing. This roller coaster was built in 2000. It's over 20 some years old at this point. Like, it's not a brand new roller coaster anymore. See, comparing it to even I 305, which was built 10 years later, in Fury 325, another Giga Coaster, which was built in 2016. It's not a fair comparison because this roller coaster was built in 2000 and it was the first. It was the first roller coaster to hit that 300-foot mark that was a full circuit roller coaster. So to call this ride a bad ride, I think is a disservice. You just have to go in with the right mindset, I think. And that's where a lot of people go wrong with this roller coaster.
Oh yeah, and even though it was built 20 years ago, I believe that it still lives up to being a really great coaster in this day and age, even for the time that it was built. And it's it's an experience that you don't get on a lot of other coasters because they do try to focus on the airtime a lot or try to focus on giving you such an intense ride. So when I really think about it, there's not too much that would be really similar to this ride. And of course, you might first try to say that it would be like another, this is an intimate ride, but it might be like another B&M. It really isn't. It's its own unique experience that I really think everyone should try and get a ride on this coaster.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And looking at this roller coaster and where it's at, I understand the criticism because Cedar Point is supposed to be the best. It's supposed to be the greatest. But I think here's the other thing too with Cedar Point. If you asked me, if this roller coaster, if I went to this amusement park 10 years ago and I said, is this the best amusement park? I would have said yes, without a doubt. But since visiting parks like Great Adventure and even Kings Island within the same state and owned by the same people, it's hard to say that Cedar Point truly is the best right now. Kings Island has a really good lineup. I don't care what anybody says. There's a lot of really good coasters at Kings Island.
Yes.
And you have been able to go to Hershey Park, which is another amusement park with a really good lineup. Two hyper coasters, multiple Intamins, multiple B&Ms. And so I think that's the other issue is that people come to Cedar Point expecting the greatest and the best and the most innovative. And some of the other parks have caught up a little bit, I think, in terms of being on the same level. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah. And to not sell Millennium Force short at the time that it was built, like you said, it was the first to be a Giga, which meant that it was the tallest and fastest when it was built. So like you said, it's just a matter of places have been catching up. And then the other problem that Cedar Point has is it's built, is it an island or a peninsula in a lake?
So it's technically a peninsula, the way it is, but it pretty much feels like an island because the part that actually connects back to the mainland is like real skinny and you don't actually drive on it.
Yeah.
So
What I'm trying
it feels
to,
kind of like an island.
sorry, continue.
But yeah, I think the point you're trying to get is that they're landlocked at this point. They don't have a ton of room to expand.
Yes, that.
And I think that is a struggle with Cedar Point. Is they have 18 coasters now, I think, with their newest Spinning Wild Mouse, and they're running out of room real damn quick, that's for sure.
Yeah, so the only way that Cedar Point at this point has any way to put in new coasters is to tear down old ones. And in reality, the ones that they have right now, none of them are really in a state where they need to go away. Like they're all very good coasters. Like you said, they have an amazing lineup. So we'll have to see what Cedar Point does from here on, but that's the biggest constraint that they have is it's just space. They don't have any room to put any more coasters at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I think we got to dive into this layout quick before we run out of time here. So diving into the layout, the cool thing that I like about this roller coaster is there's a lift hill right out of the station. And the reason that is because of the cable lift, which is another cool feature. So this roller coaster gets to the top of the hill quick. Like it gets you up there and you're up there. After that, you drop off the 300-foot tall drop, which makes it a official Giga coaster. And you come up into the first pullout that we were talking about that makes you gray out, and then you hit an overbank turn. I want to say it's probably about 200 feet tall or something like that. That's a 100% guess, so don't come at me. 169.
Yeah, this one actually
that,
isn't the tallest. That's why.
No. So after hitting that overbanked turn, you drop down into what I call a speed turn. So it's a 90-degree turn, but it's at ground level. So you are carrying the full speed of this train. And after turning, you hit the first of the two airtime hills, which this is where the Millennium Force list comes in. It doesn't have a ton of airtime, but it does have a little bit of floater, and it is sustained, which I like.
Yep.
After that, you hit the second of three overbanked turns. And this one's almost a full 100, almost a 360-degree turn, which sends you into the second one. The biggest difference is the second one is only about 180 degrees, and it rolls through that one. So the third overbank turn, you go through a lot quicker. And then after that, you hit another speed turn, really low to the ground before entering the second smaller airtime hill. After dropping off that airtime hill, you hit another speed turn, which takes you through a tunnel. And that's where you hit the best airtime moment on the roller coaster, the speed airtime hill, the bunny hill. And that actually has some really good ejector airtime. But
Oh,
the
heck
problem is
yeah.
it's so quick. Like, you're carrying so much speed at the end of this ride that you barely even feel it sometimes. You have to really pay attention to even feel it because it is ejector, but it's really quick. After that, you hit the last overbank turn, which will take you up and over the queue line. That's the big picture one that everybody has because it goes up and over the queue line. And then you roll into the final brakes. The cool thing about this ride is it's over 6,000 feet of track. Is that correct?
Hold on a second. I have the number somewhere. Yeah, it's 6,595 feet to be exact.
So even though you carry your speed incredibly well throughout this ride, the only really two slowdown moments would be the airtime hills.
Mm-hmm.
You have a 6,000 feet of track, so it's still a long ride experience. It's not short. It's not quick. And that's what I love. I love that in a roller coaster. I love speed, and I love a long layout. I love a roller
Yes.
coaster that feels like it never ends. And this is one of those roller coasters where you could almost describe it as that, as something that never ends. It feels like it's just keeps going and going. And that's really why it makes my list. But the other reason why it makes my top 15 is the historical factor of this ride that I think a lot of people tend to overlook. Is it was the first Giga coaster. It was the first to break 300 feet. And for this roller coaster to be built in 2000, it's very innovative for its time period. And that's why it makes my top 15.
I would just like to say another thing that would maybe add a little bit to this ride is I'm not sure if everybody knows this, but coasters actually don't run at exactly the same speed every single time they send a train. What makes a coaster faster is full trains, contrary to popular belief, where a full train might make it slower. I don't know if that's popular belief, but I feel like before I became a roller coaster enthusiast, I thought if a train had more people in it, it wouldn't run as fast. But no, full trains make it run faster. And then on top of that, being warm makes it also run faster. And so a
Yes.
ride on Millennium Force, if you get a day with full trains and a nice hot day, and don't ride it in the morning because it's still got to warm up, ride it in the afternoon at peak heat and it's been running all day, you will get a better ride on this coaster.
Yeah, that's definitely a struggle, especially being on Lake Erie. We grew up around the Great Lakes as well, being from Wisconsin. It's colder. It's just a simple fact. It's
Oh yeah.
colder by the lake because the water's colder. It keeps the air temperature lower. So it is a struggle to get this roller coaster at its best. And I think that's another reason why maybe some people call it forceless. But we had a lucky opportunity. We went there in the middle of July. And what was it, like 90 degrees when we rode it?
Oh, it's the worst.
And it,
It's simultaneously the worst and best weather to go to a coaster park because your coasters are going to be running at peak performance, but you're going to be sweating buckets and literally melting the entire day. But anyways.
Yeah, for sure. But the cool thing is we got to ride Millennium Force at its best, and that's it. There's nothing that you can really compare it to. It is just a speed adrenaline rush, and I love that in a roller coaster. It's another reason why King Ka is on my list because I love speed. I like going fast, and this roller coaster holds that. We have reached that time where we get to pick a winner. I'm going to go first this time. I'm taking Millennium Force. I'm sorry. Hades 360 is lower on my top 15. I've already proved I don't like it as much. But the history of this roller coaster really is underrated, especially for Intamin and Cedar Point and for the coaster wars in general between different parks. It was another step in that direction towards 400 feet that we got with Top Thrill and King Ka at the peak. And I think that's an underrated thing about this roller coaster is its history aspect. But I love Millennium Force, and I'm going to be talking this roller coaster up for a long time.
And as much as I love Hades 360 and it's a Woody, which is a personal favorite of mine, I'm gonna have to go with Millennium Force on this one. Millennium Force is just a crazy ride from start to finish, and it's nice and smooth. It pulls some great forces. And I think what might bump Hades 360 more on my list is if it were retracked. But even then, I think Millennium Force would still win out. It's that 300-foot drop. That's just absolute insanity. Then you're going straight down. And it's just an amazing ride from start to finish. So,
Yeah, poor Hades 360. I'm sorry, buddy.
yeah, he's kind of
Two
gonna.
fights and it's lost both of them.
I know. It kind of sits at the bottom
But,
of a lot of people's list, but the real thing
well,
here to realize though is it still makes the list. There are plenty of rides out there that I've ridden that don't
oh,
make my list, and Hades 360 still sits there. So,
for sure. I think the thing with Hades 360 is me and you really see the potential in that ride, but it is a little bit of nostalgic too because it, other than Six Flags Great America, you could call Mount Olympus our home park, being from
oh yeah.
Wisconsin. So I think some of it's nostalgic reasons. I think some of it too, while we knock on the coasters, because it does have its issues. You know, they don't run it with a full train. It's incredibly rough. The park it's at isn't the best. Let's just say that. So me and you can kind of see through those issues a little bit, but at the same time, those issues still hold it back at winning some of these battles.
Oh yeah. So it'll stay in our hearts. But I think Millennium Force is really the winner this time. It's just a crazy ride.
For sure. So for our next battle, this is a really, really cool one. We got two roller coasters in the same park. We are calling it the Battle at Kings Island. So that'll give you a little bit of a hint of what two roller coasters to expect. But it's two roller coasters again that are completely different, but they're in the same park, and we both like these two coasters for different reasons. I think
Oh yeah.
it's gonna be a good one for sure.
This one will be one where I promise it's not just the theming that makes me like it. Okay, it's the actual coaster itself.
Well, there is some theming, you know.
Oh
There is a
no,
little
it's
bit of
got a
theming. There's
theming.
probably
I'm
more
not saying
theming.
it doesn't. I'm just saying that I also really like the coaster for this one.
Yeah, it definitely has. I would say it has more theming than mine. I would say that,
Yeah,
but
it does, but
um,
yours is also a really good coaster, so we'll see how it goes.
yeah, yeah. With that, I think it's time to wrap this episode up.
Sounds good. Everybody come back next week and join us for the battle at Kings Island.